Exodus chapter 21 will continue our study. Last time we saw God speak the 10 Commandments. Wasn't that cool? I still just marvel at that, what that moment must have been like. All the people gathered at the foot of the mountain and hearing God's voice rumbling down the mountain with the fire and the thunderings and the lightnings and just the power and glory of it. Just amazing. And then you hear those 10 Commandments. And then the people's response, which I would have been, I think, right there with them. You know, he gets through the first commandment or two or three, and I'm already disqualified. Okay, and that's God's voice telling me what I need to do. And they said to Moses, "You speak with us and we'll hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die." And Moses agreed. But he indicated that the respectful fear was a healthy thing, saying in verse 20 last week that the fear before you was so that you might not sin. And then Moses went on behalf of the people up the mountain. So the people stood far off, and Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. And then God again began to speak to the people, but this time through Moses. And in verse 22 last week, he said, "Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, you have seen that I have talked with you from heaven." And Moses, "Thus you shall say to the children of Israel." And he goes on to expand on the 10 Commandments. And he gave us the law of the altar last time. This is how you're going to worship me. You build an altar like this. I don't want it polished and shiny and stained glass. I want it's made out of dirt. If you make it out of rocks, don't take an iron stone to it. Just make it out of rocks. Because I don't want the focus to be the altar. I want the focus to be you and me and our hearts. And then he, through chapter 23, continues with these additional instructions. And he says, "These are the judgments which you shall set before them." And he's going to go chapters 21 through 23. We're going to see at least 10 judgments. How to treat servants, murder, manslaughter, and assault, liability for your animals, responsibility for your neighbor's animals and belongings, theft and restitution, rape, idolatry, sorcery, treatment of disadvantaged people, money and lending, and justice and equal standing before the law. When he says the judgments which you shall set before them, he's indicating, you guys, you're a nation, and these are going to be your rules. These are going to be your laws. And we've appointed judges through Moses to serve you. And what we're witnessing is the establishment of a government, aren't we? Only what kind of government is it? This is Jeopardy. Well, a theocracy. Paul, for 400.
Theocracy. What is?
What is a government run by God? Okay? Now, I have to preface this. I'm going totally political, but I'm not going political here. I'm going, I guess, I'm not sure what the word would be, maybe philosophical. I'm going to talk about different governments for a moment. A theocracy is a system of government in which God rules. And what we're looking at here under Moses with God is a shadow of the millennial reign that's going to come, where God is ruling. Jesus is ruling on the earth. There are other systems of government, right? The one principle with government is that people tend to look at government in the place of God. Have you ever heard people say, the government ought to do something? You know, what about the poor here? The government ought to take care of them. The government is like Papa, or, someone that's taking care of us. And that's in conflict with God. We have different types of government. Good morning, Ray. A monarchy is ruled by a king. And he declares the rights people have. He decides who's going to work the fields and who's going to be sit in his court and who's going to be the big shots and who's not going to be the big shots. Then we have a democracy or a republic. And the people choose who rules. And those rulers declare the rights and define the rules for the people, and they define who's going to work in the fields or not. Dictatorship is kind of like a king. Whoever manages to take control gets to decide what's up. We have some examples: Hugo Chavez, Castro, Idi Amin, different dictators. And then we have communism, socialism, Marxism, and Leninism. But these are all theories that are applied to government systems. But in these cases, the government determines what rights the people have or don't have. The government is looked to establish moral laws and enforce them. The government's called upon to care for and protect the people. Now, there's something different about the United States than all these governments I've talked about. What is that, you guys? Can you think of it? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Who is assigning the rights that we enjoy? Is it Trump? No. It's God. Man, the founders had it down. God has given us rights. We're going to try to create a government that recognizes that. And it goes on that among these rights are life, liberty from God. These rights from God: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or the ability to dwell in safety. Now, Paul referenced our bulletin. When forming the government, they assigned a committee to make the government seal. And they assigned Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams to create this seal. And what you have on the bulletin is Ben Franklin's idea. Now, Jefferson and Franklin, both of them chose a scene where Moses is depicted leading Israel out of Egypt. We can see where their mind was. They're thinking biblically, this non-Christian nation that we're supposed to be now. They're thinking biblically as they're establishing the nation. And Franklin's seal that you see in your bulletin, in his own handwriting, they have his handwriting where he was talking about the seal, why we should do it. Some of it's crossed out and he puts in different words. And he wrote, Moses standing on the shore and extending his hand over the sea, thereby causing the same to overwhelm Pharaoh, who was sitting in an open chariot, a crown on his head and a sword in his hand, raised from a pillar of fire in the clouds, reaching to Moses to express that he acts by command of the deity. And the motto is going to be, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And of course, they were rebelling against King George because he was being a tyrant. So we're looking at something different today. The establishment of a theocracy. God is our government. God is our ruler. He's the one that's assigning us rights. He's the one that is setting up the rules. Wouldn't you love to live in a system like that? So we're going to pick it up in verse 2. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your judgments and showing us how things should be. Father, thank you for your love and care towards us, that you want us to live under you and in your kingdom. And Lord, thank you for that hope, that sure hope that one day we will be living with Jesus ruling the earth in that millennial reign. Thank you, Father. Amen. Verse 1. If you have a Hebrew servant, or you could say slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. If he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. But if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. This very first judgment we look at, God's focusing on protecting and respecting the rights and dignity of servants. Kind of interesting. Now, the principle of servitude or slavery existed way before Moses. All the other cultures, they had slaves. When we say slaves, what do you think about? our history. Man stealing. You go to Africa, you steal a man, ship him over and sell him, and he's treated really like an animal. It's ugly. It's evil. Here, God is eliminating forced slavery by giving servants rights. He says, if you buy a Hebrew servant, well, there's 5 basic reasons why a Hebrew might become an indentured servant, or using the word slave to another, but it's a different type of slavery. It's a complete different culture. It's a different mindset that we have to put on. First one is he might choose to sell his liberty due to extreme poverty. I am so poor. Man, let me come and work for you. I know I'll be there for 6 years, kind of like joining the military maybe. I'll be there for 6 years, and you've got to feed me, take care of me, and I'm going to serve you. Or maybe he became bankrupt. He owes creditors, and he can't pay. So instead of paying, he goes to work for the guy. We're going to see that a thief, if he must pay restitution and can't, he becomes a servant or a slave for 6 years. Now, what do we do in our culture? You'll notice as we go through these rulings, there's no prison. It's either death, or you pay restitution, or you work for the guy for 6 years. Isn't that interesting? I wonder which is more effective. And then we have some ones that I just love teaching about this morning. A dad might sell his daughter as a servant to a home. There might be some cases where that's really a great idea, but I have trouble explaining this one to you guys. This is one of those things I don't understand yet. But he would sell with the intention that she would eventually marry into that family. Or if a guy wants to learn a trade, he might sell himself for 6 years, kind of as an internship. Now, if a guy decides to buy a Hebrew servant, he has to provide for him. He can't starve him. That means feeding him, clothing him, housing him, and his family. He shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. Everything's taken care of. It's done. It's not permanent. Imagine how foreign that would have been to all the other nations around them in that time. And then Deuteronomy adds to this instruction when the guy goes out. In Deuteronomy chapter 15, if your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you and serves you 6 years, then in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. And when you send him away free from you, you shall not let him go away empty-handed. Oh, really? You shall supply him liberally from your flock, from your threshing floor, and from your winepress. From what the Lord your God has blessed you with, you shall give to him. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore I command you this thing today. So the servant had an out. He could pay his debt, he'd be provided for, and in 6 years, when he's done, he gets a fresh start. Very different from the slavery we think of, isn't it? Now, in this situation, do you think God's people would stand out to the other nations? You had this slave and you had to let him go? What are you talking about? Oh, yeah. God told us. He works 6 years, and not only that, do I have to let him go? I got to give him some sheep, bless him as he goes out so he can kind of start on his own. Well, why are you guys doing that? What makes you so different from it? Well, we're listening to God, the creator of the universe. Oh, tell me more about him. It'd be a great witness, wouldn't it? If he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. So he leaves with whatever he came in with, except that debt that he had. And verse 4, if his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. Paul, would you come up and teach this one? The presumption is the wife was also an indentured servant. So she owes. So, I guess the guy could redeem her as they go out. He can choose to stay. But she couldn't go out till she'd fulfilled her service. Verse 5, but if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free. Then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the doorpost, and the master shall take his ear and put it up against the door and put an awl through it. And then typically what they do is they put an earring in that. So as the guy's walking around town, oh, you're a servant to so-and-so, and I see that you love him and you've decided to stay for life in that situation. King David alluded to this in Psalm 40 when he's calling himself God's permanent service. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire. My ears you have opened, meaning been pierced. Burnt offering and sin offering you did not require. Verse 7. And if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. She's treated differently. Now, they were more at risk. They were more vulnerable in that culture than the men. And some fathers thought it might be more advantageous for the daughters to become a servant, probably getting married into that house, a wealthy house, rather than me, I'm poor and I can barely provide for them. If she is sold into a household, she's a servant, not a slave. She's a servant until married, but only to someone of that household. Verse 8, if she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. So if it doesn't work out, she goes back to her family. This is a really dramatic difference in the cultures around Israel at the time. God's protecting the women. Verse 9, and if he has betrothed her to her son. Do you see how marriage is a key element here? I'm going to sell her into this family because she's going to end up marrying your son. That's the plan here. Doesn't work out, I get her back. She's there as a servant until they get married. Then she's a member of that household, an equal member of the household. Verse 9, and if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, and her marriage rights. God is not saying it's okay to have multiple wives. He's saying, if you do this, you got to keep treating her right. Because I know you guys, and you're going to do this. So when you do it, you got to treat her right. And if he does not do these things for her, then she shall go out free without paying money. Let's move on to something easier. Murder. It is easier. It's pretty straightforward. Verse 12. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. However, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar, that he may die. And he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall surely be put to death. And he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. I think, parents, should we read 17 again? He who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Now, verses 12 through 17 state 4 crimes that call for the death penalty. Premeditated murder, physical violence against parents, kidnapping, verbal abuse against parents. Don't all of these violate the 10 Commandments in a way? Or at least the heart of the 10 Commandments? Let's break it down a little bit. Verse 13. However, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered it into his hand. This is a reference to the 6 cities of refuge that God's going to designate in the Promised Land. I didn't lie in wait. It was really accident or manslaughter. And a guy from the family is going to come after me and kill me. But if I run to this city, I'm safe. The guy can't kill me there. But if he did lie in wait and was premeditated murder, he says not even God's altar can protect him. Drag him away from the altar if he's there worshiping the Lord. If it's murder, premeditated murder, the guy dies. Now, why is it so dramatic on this physical violence against parents and verbal abuse of parents? Remember the fifth commandment, you'll honor mom and dad. Honor mom and dad. Remember, they're in the role, when you're young, of representing God the Father. And so, if you're not honoring mom and dad, you're not honoring the ones God's appointed. So, no, you don't get to do physical violence. Maybe you have a bad mom and dad that you don't want to hang out with. You don't get to kill them. You still have to honor that position. So that's how they violate the heart of the Ten Commandments. Verse 18, if men contend with each other. All right, Paul was talking about enemies, and and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed. What are you supposed to do? Well, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. He shall only pay for the loss of his time, and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. So in a physical quarrel, if you hurt the guy, you got to take care of him. Pay for his medical bills, pay for his time off. You know, this encourages us to manage our temper. So we live together. We should be able to live together without coming to fists. Verse 20, if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. This is another one in my file. Paul taught me to have a file of this one I don't quite understand yet. But slaves are not to be treated cruelly by their masters. Remember the heart of Deuteronomy 15 that we read. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore I command you this day. So if he dies under his hand, he's to be punished. And this probably is severe. May not be death, but it's severe. Apparently the judges would figure out the appropriate punishment. If the slave recovers, it was assumed that homicide wasn't intended and no punishment is applied. But while the guy's hurting, the master gets no work out of him. The master does suffer financially. Verse 22. I didn't write this stuff, you guys. If men fight and hurt a woman with child, oh, this one's going to be interesting, so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished accordingly as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. Man, would you want to fall under the judgment of the husband? But notice it's limited by the judges. The judges limit what that punishment will be. Verse 23, but if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. He's establishing a principle here. Understand this principle is limiting retribution, isn't it? The guy hurts the woman, they both die. What's that husband going to call for? Don't just kill him, that's not bad enough. What can I do more to kill him? But God is limiting it to eye for eye, limiting it to equal damage. This is intended to limit retribution. Our tendency is to want more. Now, when giving life for life, this principle, we need to remember Numbers chapter 35, 31, which indicates that ransom payment was allowed for loss of life that was not willful or intentional. So you injure the gal, she and the baby die, but it wasn't intentional. It was an accident. Numbers 35 reads, moreover, you shall take no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall be surely put to death. And this implies that if you're not a murderer, you can take a ransom. Verse 26, if a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. And this is interesting. Servants are treated differently with regard to the eye for an eye principle. So, you get mad and sock your servant and he loses a tooth, you lose the servant. Maybe he had 5 more years of working for you. Sorry. You've lost all of that, whatever you paid to get him. This is incentive for the master to treat his servants well. Otherwise, he loses their service. Verse 28, if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. My ox got out, he killed my neighbor. All right, I lost the ox. That's a bummer. That's like losing your tractor. Oxes were a big deal in that nation, in that culture. Verse 29, but if the ox tended to thrust with its horn in times past, and has been made known to his owner, and he has not kept it confined, so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. Ouch! You're responsible for that ox that you know is a problem. If you don't care and you let him get out and he kills your neighbor, yikes. Verse 30, if there is imposed on him a sum of money, then he shall pay to redeem his life. All right, it wasn't intended murder, so I can redeem my life here. Whatever is imposed on him, whether it has gored a son or gored a daughter, according to this judgment, it shall be done to him. If the ox gores a male or female servant, it's going to be treated differently. He shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So this whole thing addresses the principle of intent and neglect by the owner. He can redeem his life by paying a fine. Notice that the price of a servant is defined as 30 shekels of silver. So in Israel, servants were considered people with rights and value. Not so in other cultures. They're just a piece of property. But God's assigning value to servants. Can you think of any other servants that were purchased for 30 pieces of silver? Huh. What does that tell us about Jesus' role? Who is he serving? Who was he serving? Us, yeah. 33, and if a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit shall make it good. He shall give money to the owner, but the dead animal shall be his. All right, so the guy's ox, which is like a tractor, you dug a big pit, and he falls in and the ox dies. Your next door neighbor, he didn't dig the pit. It's not his fault. What are you doing, leaving that pit exposed? It was nighttime, and the ox, well, they have pretty good vision at night, but maybe it was a dumb ox. But you got to pay for that tractor. You got to pay for that ox. And since you're paying for it, yeah, you get to eat the meat. Similar principle, neglect pays for the damage. Where there's no neglect, they both are going to share in the loss. Verse 35, if one man's ox hurts another's so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money from it. And the dead ox they shall also divide. Or if it was known that the ox tended to thrust in time past, and its owner has not kept it confined, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall be his own. So it's the same thing. Our 2 ox got in a fight. One dies, the other one's okay. Bummer for both of us. Well, we're going to sell the good one and split the money, and we're going to divide the meat of the other one. We both suffer because we didn't control our oxen. But if your ox is known to kill others, well, then you got to pay for your ox. Chapter 22, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. What if we did that today? I stole that car. All right, you got to pay 5 cars back. I don't have the money. All right, you're his servant for 6 years. What do you think, instead of prison, what do you think would happen? What would our culture be like? If the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. He should make full restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall restore double. All right, so if you take the sheep and you successfully sell it and make some money, you got to buy 5. If you catch him before he sells it, you've got to pay back double. If you catch him breaking in the dark and you strike that guy with your baseball bat, you don't know who it is. It's dark outside. You can't turn the light switch on. You're guilt-free. But if it's a daytime, so you can identify him. Remember, they're all small towns back then. It was Fred. I know it was Fred. Well, you don't get to just kill him. Self-defense, yeah, but you don't get to kill him. Verse 5, if a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animal, I'm sorry, I didn't mean for my animals to get out there in your field and eat all that good grass. Oops. And it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns, so that stacked grain, standing grain, or the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. So you're responsible for your own actions, and you have to make restitution. Verse 7, if a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles to keep, and it is stolen out of the man's house, what are you going to do? If the thief is found, he'll pay double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. So if the thief is found, it takes suspicion off the money keeper. But if he's not found, you better have an alibi. If you have an alibi, okay. Make me think twice about protecting someone's money. Verse 9, for any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, a donkey, a sheep, or clothing, or for any kind of lost thing which another claims to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whomever the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. So a liar pays double for his lie when he's caught in it. Note again, in all of these laws, the price for restitution is specified. It's not left to the whim of the people or the judges. God is limiting this restitution to what is fair and appropriate. Sometimes it's severe, but God limits it. Verse 10, if a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any animal to keep, and it dies, is hurt, or driven away, with no one seeing it, then an oath of the Lord shall be between them both, that he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods. And the owner of it shall accept that, and he shall not make it good. But if in fact it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to the owner of it. If it is torn to pieces by a beast, then he shall bring it as evidence, and he shall not make good what was torn. So if it's beyond the control of the neighbor, the oath is sufficient. But it's the oath to the Lord. And if a man borrows anything from his neighbor, anybody done that? Okay. And it becomes injured or dies, the owner of it not being with it, he shall surely make it good. I remember I borrowed a plow from a friend that we used to race lawnmowers with. I hooked it to the back of my tractor. It was a 3-foot plow, 3 legs. And I sunk it into the dirt, and I started pulling, and the plow's not attached anymore. And the metal pipe was that big, solid, and it broke, just rats. So I took it to Sean, and Sean welded it and made it good. And I gave it back to the guy in working order. I borrowed it, I'm responsible for it. But if its owner was with it, if he was driving my tractor, he shall not make it good, If it was hired, it came for its hire. You brought your tractor and your plow and it broke on my field. Sorry, buddy, that's your tractor, your plow. You broke it, you fix it. You know, there's no room for argument here, is there? I borrowed it, I used it, I fixed it, I give it back in working order. I paid you, you came, it's your problem. If a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed, ooh, this would be interesting, and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money according to the bride price of virgins. Now, let's start off on this one. Let's clear up this question. The law is stating there is no such thing as morally acceptable casual sex. Sex outside of marriage is not according to God's plan. It's a beautiful creation. It's supposed to be enjoyed in marriage. If you take a virgin, you convince her. Hey, buddy, you have to marry her and provide for her the rest of her life. And the dowry that you pay, really the purpose of the dowry when a woman got married, even in a good situation, they did everything right, and he pays a dowry, that is her divorce settlement. You bail on her, she has a dowry to take care of herself so she's not left destitute. Yeah, but her dad said, I can't have her. Well, he has that right. You're a creep and the dad is wise and saying, no, you're not going to spend the rest of your life with him. But guess what you get to do, buddy? You still pay the dowry to take care of her for the rest of her life, but you don't get her as your bride. This is quite an incentive not to take advantage of women. Imagine how that would change our society today. Wow. If you can't pay it, you're a servant. Now, for the woman, she's disregarding her father's protection and society's standards. What happens with her? She's really kind of blowing it as well. And she loses out. If dad says no, what are her possibilities in this culture for marriage? Pretty tough. Next, we have 3 sins that immediately call for the death penalty. These are pretty simple. Verse 18. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Now, the word sorceress, or we have witch in some translations in English, it's a person who uses demonic powers, magic, incantations, or drugs and potions to alter your state of mind. Some Bibles say witch because it comes from the old English to wit or to know. So like I have knowledge in these demon powers, these potions. So what would a sorceress be today? What do you think? Palm readers, yeah. Palm readers, spiritualists. Even certain drug providers, they're altering your state of mind. And so what are we to do with them? You shall not permit a sorceress to live. It's pretty clear. It's not debatable, is it? 19, the next one. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. Where'd this one come from? Well, bestiality was practiced by their neighbors. The Canaanites, as they worshiped Baal, they practiced bestiality. So it's going on around them. And God is saying, no, I created you different from the animals. You're not an animal. No. Anybody does this unnatural thing, you're done. You're gone. Shall surely be put to death. No confusion here in the meaning. And then verse 20, he who sacrifices to any god except to the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. Utterly destroyed in Hebrew means utterly destroyed. It's the third of 3 capital crimes mentioned here. And of course, the third one is the basis for the 10 Commandments, isn't it? No other God besides me. Anything in the face of God is to be shunned. Now think of, you Bible scholars, how often was this last one applied in the Old Testament? How often do you read it in the Old Testament? Can you think of an example where the people that offered something to another god were actually killed? Kind of hard. Apparently they didn't follow all these laws. There is one example. Remember Elijah? The prophets of Baal? They had the contest on the mountain. You make your altar and your ox, and I'll take mine, and we'll see which one God accepts. And they were whipping themselves and crying out to Baal. And I loved Elijah. Maybe he's on vacation. Maybe your God's asleep. You got to wake him up, And then it's his turn, and he's pouring water on top of the ox and digs a trench around it and fills it up with water and just makes it impossible to burn. Says, okay, God, fire from heaven consumes the altar, the ox, and all the water in the ditch, and everything is all gone. It's obvious whose sacrifice was accepted. And then Elijah goes and takes him down to the bottom of Mount Carmel and kills the prophets of Baal. And good old Jezebel comes after him. But that's one example where they offered something to another god and they were killed for it, utterly destroyed. So with these three capital crimes, God's setting the rules for his kingdom. No other gods. You've been created as a man, woman, act like one, and no demons or sorcery. Verse 21, you shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. This is a character thing that God is specifying. This is going to be your character. You're known as my people, and when a stranger or someone from a different ethnic group or someone that's just strange to you shows up, how are you going to treat them? Treat them with kindness. How are we doing today with that, would you say? When we see strife between ethnic groups, we're not living up to this standard. Verse 22, you shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way, and they cry out at all to me, I will surely hear their cry. And my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. Well, why is he singling out widows and orphans? They're the weakest, most vulnerable in society, aren't they? So God is restraining Israel again from treating the weak and vulnerable unkindly. He's restraining Israel from over-punishing for crimes. He's calling for punishment for crimes. And since they have no one to defend them, I will surely hear their cry. Verse 25, if you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. Now, why is he prohibiting the charging of interest? Or let me rephrase this question. Who's the group we're talking about helping here? The poor. What is this implying? They have nothing. I'll loan you money, but you got to pay me interest. But I don't have anything. We're doing an unkindness. We should be kind to the poor people and helping them out. So to take money from someone's desperate need would be immoral. We're instructed to help each other and don't take advantage of them. What if it's a rich guy and you loan him money? Well, then you get to charge interest. Verse 26, we're going to continue on the same subject. If you ever take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in? And it will be that when he cries to me, I will hear him, for I am gracious. Now, I have gotten loans for my home or different things. I've had to get business loans in the past. I don't remember ever giving them my pajamas as collateral. Anybody in here done that? So apparently, this person we're loaning money to is so poor, they have nothing but the shirt on their back. Please help me. Please loan me. Look, I'll give you everything I have as collateral. I'm that desperate. And so God is saying, have some compassion. Okay, I'll take your cloak. All right, here. I'll give you some money. You can go get food and feed your family. Oh, the sun's setting. Here, let me give you your cloak back. You have something to sleep in, at least you'll be warm. Give it back to me in the morning or something. But you have to treat these guys with kindness. You can see God is defining how God's people are to treat each other in God's government, in God's established theocracy. This is how we're to live. And by living according to these rules, we will stand out compared to everyone else around us. Verse 28, you shall not revile God nor curse a ruler of your people. Boy, that's hard sometimes, isn't it? God's saying don't grumble against those that he's put in charge. Now, in this situation, who are the rulers he's talking about? Moses, Aaron, and the judges. God has put them in place to carry out all of these laws. Here's a list of laws. Now you have judges to carry them out. Hey, you people, don't grumble against them. They're trying to serve you. They're not going to do it perfectly. You got to give them some grace, but don't grumble against them. And Paul quotes this verse. Yeah, but what do you do when they're not acting right? You know, like when Jesus was here, the high priest was a creep. He's appointed by the Romans and the Sanhedrin. Well, Paul stood before that high priest that was a creep, standing before that was appointed by the Romans and the Sanhedrin. And he quotes in Acts 23, he quotes this very verse, that you shall not speak evil against God's anointed. So Paul recognizes this rule, even when the guy's a creep. Verse 29, you shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Likewise you shall do with your oxen and your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. One way of honoring and worshiping God is to give him his due. We're supposed to give God offerings. If we hold back, I'm not ready to give it, I want to hang on to it for a while, we're not honoring God. First of your crops, first of your earnings, not the last of your crops and the last of your earnings. Give the best to the Lord. And for Israel, remember the firstborn given to God was remembrance of God delivering them by means of the firstborn in Egypt. So anything that's owed to God should be paid promptly. Last verse of the day, verse 31. This is kind of a summary. And you shall be holy men to me. You shall not eat meat torn by beasts in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. Why are those two verses together? I get you shall be holy men to me. What does holy mean? Set apart, special. You guys are remember, you're a priestly nation. You're my representation, Israel, to the world about the Messiah that's going to come. You're special. You're in relationship with me. You're special to me. You're to be set apart as a people. And then he moves on to talk about what animals do, all the rest. You guys are special. Now look at animals. They find some animal on the road. You hit a skunk driving down the road, and the birds are going to be there eating it, and animals are going to eat it, and they're just acting like animals. Yuck. You're to be different. You're a holy people. So you're to be a holy to me, special, and you're not to act like those animals. You shall not eat meat torn by beasts in the field. Throw it to the dogs. Let the animals eat it. You don't go out there and eat it like a dog. You're to be different. So he's giving them an illustration of how they're to be different. You're to be different than all the other nations around you. You're to be special because you are my witness to the world as God's people and God's government and God's standards. The more you dig into it and look into it, it just gets deeper and deeper. Chapter 22 next time. Remember, chapter 22 and 23, we'll finish up with these rules. Sometimes they seem dry, but I just like looking at God establishing his kingdom. I would love to live in a theocracy instead of any other form of government. What gets me is, why would Israel years later go, give us a king, and he can go out and fight our battles for us? We'll be like the other nations. That's completely opposite to what we're studying here, but that's what Israel did. And God went, yeah, all right, Samuel, listen to them. We'll give them what their heart desires. I'd like them to live under me, but we'll give them what their heart desires.